US President Donald Trump calls his Ukrainian counterpart a modestly successful comedian and a dictator. Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Trump of living in a Russian-made disinformation space. So can their relationship be saved, or does Zelensky need a new strategy? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. On Tuesday, the president of Ukraine was shut out of talks on the future of his country. And during the next 48 hours, a war of words erupted. The new US administration revealed a stunning reversal of America's policy on the war in Ukraine. Trump launched a tirade against Zelensky, accusing him of misleading the US about spending millions of dollars on a war that couldn't be won. He also blamed Ukraine for starting the war, despite the fact it was Russia that invaded. Framing the Ukrainian president as the main obstacle to peace, Trump claimed Zelensky's approval rating had plummeted to 4% and warned he'd better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. All this adding to mounting concern in Kyiv that Trump's idea for ending the war is exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin has been hoping for. So is all this about what's best for Ukraine, or more a personal vendetta dating back to Trump's first term in office? We'll be discussing those questions with our guests, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
A war of words between longtime allies, escalating over a week. The tensions between the American and Ukrainian presidents first broke out on Tuesday, with Donald Trump declaring Kyiv had started the war in Ukraine, despite the fact Russia invaded.
You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed and no city would have been demolished.
Trump was making the comments shortly after the US and Russia held their first high-level talks in 3 years, hosted by Saudi Arabia, and aimed at ending the war. On Wednesday, Zelensky hit back, criticizing Trump for spreading lies.
Unfortunately, President Trump, who we have great respect for as the leader of the American people, whom we respect very much, who supports us constantly, unfortunately lives in this disinformation space.
Thank you. That comment led to Trump launching his most stinging attack to date on the Ukrainian president. In a long and scathing social media post, he accused Zelensky of talking the U.S. into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won. And he branded Zelensky a dictator, despite him being elected in a landslide in 2019, in elections judged free and fair by international monitors. Trump doubled down on those comments later in Florida.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia.
The spiraling exchange is fueling fears of an irreversible rift between the leaders. Trump has previously spoken of his admiration for Vladimir Putin's strength and blamed Ukraine for allegations of Russian collusion that dogged his first U.S. presidential victory. And all of this appears aimed at undermining Zelensky's credibility as a leader. And he's warned it would be very difficult for Ukraine to survive Russia's continued onslaught without U.S. support. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this further with our guests today. And joining us in Rochester, Cay Johnston, author of 3 books on Trump, Pulitzer winner and professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. In Düsseldorf, Ina Borzylo, co-founder and researcher at a German-Ukrainian think tank. And in Nice, Philip Short, a biographer of Vladimir Putin and a former foreign correspondent with the BBC. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today on Inside Story. Well, we're looking at this huge issue of Ukraine again today, and the way I want to run the discussion today is to look at the key players, their actions, their aims and their motivations. Philip, let me start with you, because you are the distinguished biographer. When you look at something like this, how important is it not just to look at the policy positions, but at the personalities and the temperaments of the key figures?
I think in Putin's case, it's extremely important. He is patient, he's persistent, he doesn't give up once he's decided something. And I think we've seen this during the Ukraine war. Things did not go as he planned at the beginning. He kept at it. And I think one of the key things is how long he wants to keep at it. Because we talk about Trump, wanting a deal. But for a deal, you have to have two people. And the other person is Putin. How keen is Putin to have a deal quickly? I think there are two elements there. Putin, on the one hand, wants to keep Trump in the game, as it were. He wants to convince Trump that he actually will eventually do a deal. And at the same time, he would like to keep going because he sees that Russia, in his view at least, is winning at the moment. On the ground, Russian troops are advancing. And the more they advance, the more progress he can make in practice, the better deal he's likely to get. So he has to balance.
David, let me ask you now about Trump's aims in all of this. We know, I think, by listening to what he said, his stated aims. He wants to reduce all the money the US is paying to support Ukraine. And he also says repeatedly he wants to end the bloodshed, a quote from him, to stop the savage barbarism. But do you think those are all of Trump's aims?
No, by no means whatsoever. And Donald believes we're sending dollars to Ukraine. We're not. Support for the war is an American jobs program. Americans make the weapons and electronics that we then give to Ukraine. Donald wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He's very upset that he didn't get it. And this is one of the ways he might achieve that. Unfortunately, peace talks normally involve all the parties, and the talks in Saudi Arabia are between only two parties, Russia and the United States, not Ukraine. And then secondarily, Donald, who was brought up with a monstrously horrible father, is an empty vessel inside. He is always trying to fill the emptiness inside him with flattery, with money or claims of money, exaggerating things because of the way he was raised. And he really believes that only Donald Trump can be president. In fact, he claimed last Friday dictatorial authority, saying he can't do anything that would violate the law when he's trying to save the country. And the White House put out a photo of him yesterday in which he was wearing a crown. And of course, the United States was started as a revolution against the British monarch.
On the figures that Donald Trump's given out about how awful this is for the US, how much money Ukraine has got, he says 350 billion. You look up the actual figures from the Special Inspector General, it's 131.1 billion. And actually Europe, despite what Trump says, is giving more. And yet you have Trump sending his Treasury Secretary to Ukraine, wanting to take 50% of Ukraine's minerals. How is all of this seen in Ukraine? Because I've heard some commentators describing it as extortion.
Well, you can call it this name, or like for a lot of Ukrainians, it feels like we woke up into Black Mirror series, or I don't know, Don't Look Up, or any other, anti-utopian stories which were warning us about such change in politics to come. It's terrible because for someone it's a big lie, for someone it's a fight for political ratings or whatever, desire for quick deals without looking into the essence of such deals. For us, it's life. Yes, for us, Ukrainians, this is pushing us to the back when suddenly with the new president elected, U.S. is not even neutral. U.S. is more likely to take the position of the abuser, of the aggressor, of Russia. And it's quite sobering. But luckily, unlike Europe, Ukraine woke up quite some time ago. Yes, for the rest of the world, for our European partners, this is a new information. That yes, the politics can be this way, real politics is back, and that there is no more world of, you can say it values-based or agreements-based and so on and so forth. For us as Ukrainians, we are shocked. The situation is very, very serious, but we need to play with the cards we have. Yes, our back is maybe already back to the wall, but we need to make the best out of this situation.
Okay, I want to bring in David again, because it's clear to me from the last 4 years that Donald Trump was in office and the 4 weeks he's been in office this time, that he doesn't like Ukraine and he doesn't like Zelensky. Can you drill down on that? Because, I mean, even if you go back to when he was first elected in 2016, he was critical of Ukraine. What is, I mean, and it was also part of his impeachment in 2019. Tell us why he dislikes Ukraine so much, because it seems evident he does.
Well, because Ukraine is to Vladimir Putin an area that Russia used to control and does no more. And Vladimir Putin has said clearly many times that he wants to essentially put back together the old Soviet Union. Donald identifies with Vladimir Putin just as he does the dictators Kim in North Korea, Xi in China, and others, because Donald doesn't really believe in democracy. He believes in power, and he's very transactional. And Vladimir Putin has brilliantly flattered him. Donald is very, very subject to flattery. And finally, Donald doesn't know anything. And I mean that quite seriously. He claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects. In fact, he didn't know what happened at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. His chief of staff had to explain. He didn't know that Finland is a country. He thought it was part of Russia. He has no historical understanding. And it's one of the things in the nearly 40 years that I've known Donald, spent many hours with him, that's always been striking is people think he's some sort of genius. He's appallingly ignorant. So he looks at Ukraine. Vladimir Putin says that should be part of Russia. He makes this false claim that Russia is the mother country. 1,000 years ago, Kyiv was a thriving city. Moscow was some huts in the woods. And Donald, not knowing any of the history, he goes along with his fellow dictator, Vladimir Putin.
Philip, I mean, are you surprised when you hear the comments from Trump? Because it seems that so many of these things, Zelensky is a dictator, Zelensky started it, these are all the Russian talking points that we've heard for the last 3 years, and they're now coming out of Trump's mouth.
Well, that's true, but I think it's also something which shows that Trump is not really concerned about Ukraine. He doesn't regard it as a vital American interest. He wants to get out of there, much as he wanted to get out of Afghanistan. And how he gets out, I don't think bothers him too much. Whether it's hanging the Ukrainians out to dry, which is, I'm afraid, almost certainly what is going to happen, or whether it's pushing for to some extent, more equitable agreement. Let me just come in. There was one thing I did disagree with, and I disagree with strongly. Putin does not want to reconstitute the Soviet empire. Ukraine is a very special case for him. And you talk about Kiev having been a major city 1,000 years ago. Yes, but it's also that all that history is, for Russians, a major part of their identity, and not just for Putin. I remember back in the late 1980s, when the Soviet Union was breaking up, Russians saying to me, well, we don't mind if Georgia and Armenia go, but Ukraine, no question, that's part of our identity. So let us not understate the extent to which Ukraine really is a special case. It's not the beginning of something bigger. It's something about which Putin is obsessed.
Inna, if you look at what's happened so far, and we've only had 4 hours of negotiations, but Putin seems to have got a great deal already. He's going to get territorial gains from his invasion. We don't quite know what they're going to be, but clearly he's going to keep territory. Ukraine's not going to be a NATO member. They've started conversations not just on sanction lifting, but possibly historic economic opportunities. Russia's diplomatic isolation has ended, and he's managed to split Europe and the US. Putin couldn't have hoped for a better outcome.
Well, so far everything looks like we are playing according to the Putin's book, indeed. But it's up to us now, how do we use this chance and how do we use this moment? Yes, unlike other countries, Europe now and Ukraine, we do not have a luxury opportunity to despair. We do not have a luxury opportunity to read Trump and, answer him back with something the same aggressive as he talks to us. No, we need to transform this moment into action. I haven't seen any concrete so-called peace plans from Putin or Trump, rather than in some social media messages. So there is nothing to be discussed, in fact. And I just want to jump in to the previous speaker who talked about the Ukraine being a part of identity for Russians. This is the part of history they want to steal from us, because without it, they don't have the roots into centuries, and they cannot claim themselves being an empire equal to Rome or whatever else empire they want to compare them with. So Ukraine is indeed very important for them. And it brings us to the point that nothing shows that Putin has changed his military goals in this war. So any conversation about negotiations, peace agreements, and so forth, in combination with his slow but successes on the battlefield, it just leads us to the same game as it was mentioned today. He just wants the world to play this game, that Putin is there ready to negotiate, and Ukraine, for some reasons, is not ready to give up.
Like your take on that, Philip, in terms of Putin's aims. Putin, I assume, will now want this to move very, very fast as it's going his way.
I'm not sure about that, actually. If it's going his way, he may well want to drag it out to get more advantage. As the Russians are doing better on the battlefield, and obviously at the moment morale on the Ukrainian side must be very, very difficult, because they are being hung out to dry. Their best ally, their most important ally, is turning away from them. Now, all that makes a situation in which Putin, the longer he goes on pushing militarily, the better position he may feel he's going to be in. So, frankly, I don't expect these peace talks are going to lead anywhere in the next few days or few weeks. Rather, something within the next year. Within the next year, I think there will be an outcome, but don't expect it to come too soon.
David, you are our Trump watcher, expert Trump watcher here. When you look at Zelensky, he tried diplomacy, he tried playing it calm. Then last weekend at Munich, he got a bit tougher. And in recent hours, he now says Donald Trump is living in his disinformation space. Is that the right way to challenge Trump, or do you think that's not going to get him anywhere?
Well, I don't think he can get anywhere with Donald Trump. I don't think there's any prospect of that whatsoever. And what he's hoping will happen is that the European countries, particularly Poland, Germany, the Danes, the French, and the English, will step up and help Ukraine. And I disagree with Philip, by the way. Vladimir Putin is on the record in numerous places saying that he thinks the worst thing that ever happened in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and that he wants to bring back these countries. The government leaders I have interviewed in Europe and family members I have all say they expect, if Vladimir Putin succeeds in Ukraine, that tanks are going to roll into the Baltic states, they're going to roll into Moldova, Slovakia, Not right away, because Putin has lost more than half his war material, and he's losing soldiers at the rate of 1,500 deaths per day.
Okay, David.
The United States
David,
lost
I'd like
300.
very, very quickly. I'm seeing Philip is disagreeing strongly with you. Philip.
Yep.
Very much so. No, I think this is a pure propaganda spin. European leaders are indeed saying, if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, then we're going to be next. But if you want taxpayers, European taxpayers, the public opinion, to support aid for Ukraine, you have to give them a reason. And the best reason you can give them is saying, well, if we don't support Ukraine, we are going to be in the target next time. It is propaganda. It's a spin. And one sees now European leaders realizing that actually this whole war is going to turn out rather differently and not in a way they want. There are tremendous contortions in all the European capitals. How are we going to deal with this? Because we've been saying,
of course, Philip, the key European capital where they're watching this most is Kyiv. And what is Zelensky going to do? Interestingly, of all people, the US Vice President J.D. Vance has given his own advice. He said it's not a good way to deal with President Trump. Of course, the Ukrainians are going to have their perspective. The way to surface that is in a private discussion with American diplomats. He's attacking the only reason this country exists publicly, and it's disgraceful. It's not something that's going to move Trump. In fact, it's going to have the opposite effect. Inek, can you tell us your reaction to J.D. Vance giving advice, and do you think that is the right advice? Do you think that Zelensky is actually just riling Trump and making things worse?
I think that Zelensky is legitimate president of Ukraine, and he's trying to make the best of this situation without sitting and dealing something directly, without any security guarantees. U.S. is now not giving us any guarantees. They play the role of peacemaking without actually, which is not about peace, which is about deal. Whether this deal guarantees us any peace, this is the most important question for Ukraine. Ukraine does want to finish the war. Believe me, this is what we want from the second one, as the president says. This is what
I know. I get what you're saying, Ina, but does he need to try something different? Should Zelensky, in the next 24 hours, get on a plane and go and speak to Donald Trump? Should he reopen those negotiations on minerals and make it a transactional deal? I mean, because what he's doing right now seems to be making relations between the two men worse and worse, and that's not going to help Ukraine, is it?
I think what President Zelensky should focus now is focus on Ukraine. And President Trump already said that he will potentially bring back the agreement on minerals on the table. So it will come not from our side. We have our red lines in this agreement. We would like to have American investments, but secured by some proper package of security guarantees, right? Protected. What we need to do now is, I think, closely cooperate more with our European partners. Because
okay,
this is not
David, if I could bring you in, David, do you think that Zelensky should try something different? Clearly, he's working with the Europeans. Is there anything he could do out of the box to change things now?
I don't see anything he can do with Donald Trump that will change things, because Donald is to the point where he's spouting Russian propaganda like Ukraine started the war that has no basis in fact. And so I just don't see any hope there. I think Zelensky's principal hope would be to persuade the leaders of the major European countries to provide more military aid than they're providing now. And they're providing significant aid, but more, and probably to appeal to the rest of the world by saying, if Putin succeeds, well, President Xi is going to continue his expansionist plans to take over Taiwan and various other pieces of land near China, that we will see other dictators try similar moves if Putin isn't stopped. But
okay,
other than
quickly want to bring Philip in on that on the point about what Zelensky should do. Do you see any clever move? I mean, China was mentioned. Should he reach out to China, for example?
Won't help. Xi and Putin, it's going to be very difficult to divide them. And the great problem is, are the Europeans in a position, do they have the capacity to step in if America is not there? I think that's a really big problem. And people will accuse me of being very pessimistic. I think this is a problem to which there is no real solution. Zelensky is backed into a corner, and I don't see any way in which he's going to be able really to change the situation around.
David, I'm going to bring in one other figure, one other character in this, which shows that perhaps with Donald Trump you can have a successful outcome, and that's the host of this in Riyadh, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He gets a lot of benefit out of this, does he not?
Well, perhaps, depending on how this goes. But I don't think the Saudis have positioned themselves as we're going to come up with the solution to this that involves all of these parties. But you've hit the one area where I would tell you I don't have a lot of deep expertise about the Saudi government.
Yes, but I mean, you have expertise on Trump, and just offering to host this may be good news for the Saudis, who are trying to get other things. For example, they're very worried about the Trump plan on Gaza, and this is a transactional president who'll play one thing off against the other, won't he?
Were the Saudis to offer to put a lot more money than the $2 billion they already have with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, that might well perk up Donald's interest, because any mention of large sums of money, Donald suddenly pays attention. So they potentially could have an influence there. But beyond that, I simply don't know.
David, thank you very much, and thanks to all our guests today, David Cay Johnston, Ina Borzylo and Philip Short. Remember, we're here every day, and if you can't catch the programme when it's on television, we have a podcast version, or you can watch it online on our website whenever you want at aljazeera.com. If you have views, comments, even complaints, please post them on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X, look for @AJ Inside Story. I'll be back in this seat again next time. Until then, from me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha, bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.